For us.
Roddy, how are you?
Doing well, doing well.
Hey, we're talking about the documentary, Have You Got It Yet? The story of Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd. You've got all three remaining members of Floyd, plus it's on their YouTube channel. Is that a little overwhelming? I mean, to get those three guys to do anything together would be phenomenal. And yet here you are involved in, I mean, the biggest classic rock event of all time. I mean, this is up there, right?
Absolutely. It's really fortunate, I would say. In terms of choices of words. But I'd done a film on Storm Thorgerson I was kind of on their radar already. And having Storm involved in the film kind of gave me, an opening to reach out to them and so forth. And, they saw bits and pieces along the way, but all incredibly generous. From all supportive. I've heard through the grapevine, they all really like the film. So yeah, but you're absolutely right. To have your trailer on the Pink Floyd channel is just unreal.
Now, Storm is infamous for these classic rock album covers and shooting with like actual film and not using Photoshop. So you've got everybody from Led Zeppelin to Thornley to AC/DC and just so many Pink Floyd albums. I mean, not just mentioning Dark Side of the Moon. So did he right away give you a narrative about Syd? Because the classic tale is did a bunch of drugs, lost his mind, left the band. But then Storm would have known him a lot longer. So did he give you a different narrative right away, or you already knew something was different?
No, I mean, what happened was that we were screening my film on Storm in LA. And, one morning, this musician, Rob Dickinson from Catherine Wheel, said to Storm, Roddy should do the film about Syd that hasn't been done. And so literally the next day over breakfast, Storm said, what do you know about Syd Barrett, Roddy? And, it's a long story, but,
We're at the gates of dawn. Yeah. Learning how to play it.
Yeah. So we started this film and, we just basically wrote out an outline of who we wanted to interview, what stories we wanted to prove or, debunk. But Storm really hadn't seen Syd for quite some time as well. So he grew up with Syd and Roger and David in Cambridge. But there's a span of years where, Syd moved to London, Pink Floyd take off, and Storm didn't see him through all those years. So he didn't really have necessarily any different take than anyone else, which is, about conjecture and projection. And I told Storm once, I said, you didn't see him from age, 17 to whatever it was. A lot happens in that time. And imagine also, besides that, the band taking off. So, he didn't have a narrative really about it. And so that was part of the exploration of the film.
Let me go back in time a little bit before all of this came together. Is it true? Pink Floyd Animals tour, were you there for 11 hours?
Well, yeah, that was the first concert I went to. I grew up in Los Angeles and literally my friend and I don't know why we did this. It must have been because of the festival seating that happened at shows back then. But literally my father drove a friend of mine and I at 4 a.m, dropped us off in the parking lot for the animal show. And literally said, I'll meet you back here at 11 hours, time, row C, section 10 or something like that. So it's absolutely true.
Another rumor I heard, I'd like to have you tell me whether it's true or not. Did Syd at one point walk into Abbey Road Studios and Pink Floyd's recording and they didn't recognize him? They're just like, yeah, some guy's here. And he looked so different. It had been so long. They didn't catch on right away. Is that true?
That's an absolutely true story. And, it's just totally uncanny. And I'd read a little blurb somewhere that Phil Taylor, who was Pink Floyd's road manager at the time, had a camera. And I know Phil pretty well. He's David Gilmour's guitar technician now. And I emailed him, and I called him, I emailed him, I called him. And finally Phil said, yes, it's true. I do have some pictures. And so generously, he said, this is the film. And he gave us a few photos. I made a compromise. I didn't use every single one, but there's pictures of Syd at the mixing desk with Roger and the band at that moment. So there's actually documentary proof of that moment. And Nick Mason retells the story about seeing Syd as well as Phil. So it's just, but it is one of the folklore tales that he showed up during the recording of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, the song about him, but it's absolutely true.
So what were the emotions like with Nick and David and Roger then? Because they've often said they'd just be this cover band without Syd. I mean, it's not just picking the name and getting the first couple albums up and running, but they're like, was it kind of like he was the big brother and they looked up to him? So how did the emotions return when these guys started recalling Syd?
Yeah, I think they were stunned, at first, because I think visually he just wasn't the, beautiful Syd, that they played with in the band. And so visually, I think they didn't recognize him. And so they were stunned at first. And then, Storm tells the story that Roger cried, so they were all very deeply affected. And it must have been doubly emotional, with the fact that they were doing Shine On You Crazy Diamond, a song about him. So it's, I think one of the things about the film is that bringing them back to certain times or certain moments in their life really opened the gateway to thinking about memory and, what they did, what they didn't do, what they could have done, all these sorts of things. So that was kind of the emotional, powerful element of those kinds of things. Not only that, but other moments in their lives.
Now, as an artist, looking at Storm's work again, he did all these iconic albums. Removing the music from it and being a fan of, say, Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin, as an artist, what was it about him that drew you to his work?
Well, when I found out he was still alive, I didn't know Storm, but I knew Hypnosis, their artwork, and I'd had Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and stuff when I was young. And I was fascinated that he was still doing record covers, number one, in the same manner that he did in the 60s and 70s, which is actually, he would always say, I do it for real. And at the time, I was shooting still in 16 millimeter movie film as digital technology was coming in. I'm a big vinyl record collector, still have a huge vinyl collection. So I was thinking a lot about those things, about technology changing our lives, and that idea. And, when I met Storm, I said, I figured out the Hypnosis covers. You're a film director. I'm a film director. They're film stills. They're movie stills. And that's what makes them compelling, because you put on the record, you track the songs, you stare at the record cover, and it's like a still of a moment where you're wondering what happened before and what happened afterwards.
The guy on fire. I've always wondered, what's the story? Yeah,
exactly. So Storm, he smiled and he laughed at that. I think that was part of our bonding that happened deeply in making the film. But, that's what's pretty amazing about them, that, you can have a static image, but it's not a static image. It's an image where you're projecting into it. And I always hope my films function like that. I always say I hope they function as triggers, to thinking about bigger things.
Now, you almost had David Bowie in the documentary. I know at the time it turned out he was going through cancer and working on his final album. So who else ended up in this documentary? I mean, the people that he would have known, the list would be exhausting. So who's hard to get a hold of? Who's on the short list, and who ends up in this documentary?
Yeah, I think we are very lucky because my producer's friends with Pete Townsend. And I literally got a phone call, and Orion Williams, my producer, said, "Hey, I was just with Pete. He's friends with him." And he said, he wants to be in the movie. And the Who are doing 2 shows up Northern California. They're coming back to LA. Can you get here next Tuesday? And I said, absolutely. And so he really became, the firsthand account of seeing Syd and, early Pink Floyd at the UFO Club. He was like, he told the story. He said, I took Eric to see Jimmy, blew him away with Jimmy. So I thought I'd take Eric to see, Syd. And so, that was really incredible. I mean, there was one musician that I was tracking down who I'm a big fan of, which is Julian Cope. And he's pretty elusive, but I thought in some way he's kind of, maybe inherited some of the lineage of Syd. But, we were very fortunate. We got almost everybody we wanted, I would say. And I did a late interview with Rosemary, Syd's sister, which came at the 11th hour too.
Last question, I'll let you go. I know that you go to Hawaii quite often, and people always think of the beaches, but for me, my favorite thing about Hawaii is the food. I think it's just phenomenal. What do you, when you get to Hawaii, what do you have to have?
In terms of food, or?
Yeah, food. Yeah, sure. Or if there's something else, or if it's a different thing for you.
My family's originally from Hawaii, so my dad's still there. So, the first thing I have to do is float in the ocean.
Yeah.
I do feel that pull. But in terms of food,
Spam.
I do have one Loco Moco.
Yeah.
A trip. I can't have more than one. My wife won't allow that, but I have one Loco Moco.
Well, Roddy, thank you so much. This is a fantastic documentary. It's called Have You Got It Yet? Oh, and that's a reference to an unfinished song of Syd's, correct? That's where the title's from?
Yeah, it's a song where he came into rehearsal and changed it every time he played it for them. And the chorus was, "Have you got it yet?" And they would have to say out, "No." So
it's kind of a joke, and he just keeps changing it. And they're like, "We can't learn this song," and then they realize he's pulling a trick on him. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's the story of Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd. Roddy, thank you so much for the time, and really enjoyed this documentary.
Great force. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.